Every year at Source for Consulting, we interview hundreds of clients and consulting firms around the world about the trends they see in management consulting. Since the summer, we've had a real sense that clients are starting to batten down the hatches and trim their consulting budgets. Where does this leave consulting firms in 2012, many of whom are planning to grow? We think there are 5 strategies that consulting firms should consider for the next year. The first strategy is all around specialisation and innovation. All the clients we talk to emphasise the need for world-class expertise. It's one of the most important reasons why they bring consultants in. And they're continually raising the bar by hiring ex-consultants, by setting up their own internal consulting practices. They're setting new levels of expertise that they're expecting from consulting firms. That's a threat, but it's also an enormous opportunity. We know from looking at fee rates over the last 2 or 3 years that the most senior skilled people can still charge their time out at premium rates, even when middle ranking and junior consultants' rates are under threat. So the real challenge here for consulting firms and the opportunity is to define very clearly what they're a specialist in. Now clearly we have some firms that are big brands that cover many different areas, but for the vast majority of consulting firms, the future is going to lie in being seen to be a specialist. Yet, ironically, many firms are frightened of going down that line. They're worried that by missing out on certain markets, by defining their specialisation too narrowly, they won't be able to grow their business in the future. We don't agree with that. We think that growth will come from being specialised and being seen by clients to bring world-class expertise. And that's the first area of growth for the next year. The second strategy is completely the opposite of the first one. So it's all about diversification. But diversification is something that we've seen big firms doing a lot over the last few years. We've seen strategy firms moving into operational work. We've seen operational work firms moving into strategy work, into technology. We've seen technology firms moving into HR and HR firms moving into technology. Everybody's been moving into different services. Everybody's been diversifying. And it still remains a viable strategy for a big firm. But we've got to imagine that as they diversify further, they're stretching not just their brand but their price point into new areas. And while they can continue to do this, they've got to look at how they can move into markets which are quite alien to the areas that they used to be in. Clients won't expect to see them in those spaces. Maybe they need to find acquisitions that will boast both their capability and their brand. But the other thing about diversification is it can be positively dangerous if you're a small to mid-sized firm. Generally, consulting firms get to round about 100 to 200 people and they start to think they're not growing fast enough and that the grass in the next door field or even the field some miles off is much greener than the grass that they're currently standing on. So they diversify. They hire new people, they target new clients, they move into new areas. And what actually happens is the business suffers. Utilisation goes down, management gets distracted, clients get confused. It's been the ruin of many consulting firms. And it's unnecessary, because all of our research, when we look at specialist areas of consulting, suggests that the market for specialist services is much bigger than consulting firms imagine. And that a consulting firm usually has a lot of ground it can cover in its own home market, and it's easier for it to do that than it is to move into new pastures. So diversification is a source of growth, but I suspect it will be an area of growth for bigger firms rather than smaller firms, or a viable strategy for bigger firms than smaller firms. The third option for growth is cross-selling. What do I mean by that? Well, if we look at the structure of the consulting industry today, the volume of work being done by standalone consulting firms in the classic mode that we think of them, is shrinking almost daily. Many of these firms as specialists are being absorbed by bigger firms. As they move into those bigger firms, there's an opportunity for them not just to sell and continue to sell to their external clients, but sell to their internal clients too. Indeed, we can look at many firms today that offer consulting services and realise that they also offer different kinds of services. It might be outsourcing, audit, accounting, tax, corporate finance, actuarial work, systems integration. Consulting practices are now often part of bigger companies, and there are opportunities there to sell to the internal market as well as to the external market. This is potentially a big source of growth, especially if we look at technology firms, because all of our client feedback suggests that over the next year or so there's going to be quite a strong technology flavour to consulting. So consulting firms that are linked to technology firms will be able to leverage that mixed resources. But it does depend on the consulting firm within the bigger firm working effectively. And what we saw during the recession was those practice areas, if you like, being like cogs in a machine. There's consulting practice over in one side, the outsourcing or systems development part is another cog in the machine, but the teeth of the cogs didn't quite meet together. So the overall machine didn't work quite as well as it should have done. And that really showed during the recession. Now there are opportunities to grow here. You can see that a consulting practice that's part of a bigger firm could sell its services to the outsourcing practice or a technology practice, but only if people really understand how the cogs of the machine work together. So it's an option for growth, particularly for bigger firms that are part of a group or conglomerate of different types of services, but it will only happen if they really understand how consulting fits with the other parts of the business. The fourth option for growth is something we've been talking a lot about this year, which is globalisation. Outside financial services, one of the key areas in which consulting firms have managed to grow in the last 12 months is with clients who've got a footprint in international markets. And we expect this will continue to be true in 2012. Clients who are trying to build their own facilities, their own markets in different emerging economies that are growing faster than they are doing in the West, will be looking for expertise from consulting firms to help them do that. But who's going to benefit from this? Broadly speaking, we've got three layers of clients. We've got sort of the multinational companies who have got that footprint and are using big consulting firms to help them consolidate it. We've got small domestic companies who are probably going to remain domestic over the next few years, and they'll continue to grow the same levels of local GDP, so it will be a slower growth path that they're on. But the interesting space is mid-market companies, and really some quite big mid-market companies who are almost wholly national at the moment. So here we're talking about a business that might be 500 million euros, €1 billion euros or bigger, but has most of its business in one country. They'll be looking to expand overseas. If they want to grow faster than their local market rate, it's the only option they've got, and they'll be looking for consulting help to do that. Now, who will they go to? They could go to the big multinational consulting firms, but they may not quite be willing to spend the premium rates that those firms demand. They almost may feel more comfortable working with the mid-sized consulting firms they're more familiar with. But those mid-sized firms may not be global. So the opportunity here is for the mid-sized firms to create a more global network to their business. It doesn't mean they've got to have an office in every country. It probably means more recruiting people who are able to work in different countries, whom clients can turn to and say, so we're based here in Scandinavia and we want to set up a facility in China, or we're based in Spain and we want to work in South America. Who have you got who can help us negotiate the difficulties between those markets? Those types of recruits will be immensely valuable over the next year, and it's a huge opportunity for mid-sized consulting firms to be able to step up into that faster growing, more international consulting business. Of course, some won't make that. Some will remain working for smaller companies who just operate locally, and as a result those consulting firms will grow more slowly. But one of the key opportunities for growth in 2012 will undoubtedly be to be more global, and to be able to bring that global mindset to bear with clients who are themselves taking the first steps in globalisation. The fifth and final area of growth for next year is, we think, going to be about how you redefine consulting. We know from many different areas that the traditional pyramid structure of a consulting firm is under pressure. We've got clients recruiting ex-consultants, internal consulting units, consulting firms themselves who are grappling with the demographics of different countries, and indeed tax regimes that may make it difficult for them to hire full-time staff and make it easier for people to be freelance consultants. All of these are creating pressure on the pyramid structure of the firm. And one could react to this by continuing to do what you've always done, or it's possible to look at redefining what it means to be a consultant. And we're seeing some consulting firms develop some quite creative ideas about how they deliver services, whether it's offering people from a sort of distinct consulting group who are much cheaper, who come straight from university, and ring fencing that part of the business to say there's a different price point, a different salary level, and clients can buy from that area without having to have the expensive partner time involved in it. Or maybe it's being able to offer people just the partner time without the junior people alongside that. In all the debate about the shape of the consulting firm, whether it's pyramid shaped, whether it's going to be diamond shaped, coffin shaped, mushroom shaped, we suspect it's going to be hourglass shaped, that there'll be more demand at the top of the pyramid and some demand at the bottom of the pyramid, but that the part in the middle will get squeezed. That, of course, creates its own challenges around career development and how people will create the consultants of the future. How consulting firms respond to that is another potential area of growth. One can sit there and say, we accept it's happening but we don't know what to do, or one could find more creative ways of delivering and configuring consulting services. So that's the fifth potential area for growth. So we've discussed 5 areas here for options for growth. The key thing at this stage in the year, and looking forward to 2012, is to look closely at your business and try and work out which of these 5 options is the most applicable to you. Some of them are mutually exclusive. Some of them will work better for some firms than others. The key thing, I think, going into 2012 is to have put serious consideration into which of these strategies will work. Because the one thing we can be sure about next year, and it will be a very, very uncertain market, the one thing we can be sure about is that we'll need to have a plan. Being able to just assume that there's going to be growth won't be enough to grow in that market. Not everybody can grow. You'll only be able to grow by taking market share from somebody else. So how are you going to do that? Going into 2012 without a plan strikes me as being the single most dangerous thing a consulting firm could do. Being clear about which of these 5 strategies you should be adopting will be, I think, the key to success in 2012.